Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Campa. I'm an associate dean in the graduate school and a professor of wildlife ecology at Michigan State University, and I'm going to be the moderator this morning. And while our panelists are getting settled, I'll quickly introduce them before we open it up for questions and discussions for them. Ainsley Abram, Junior PhD, who's the director of the SREB State Doctoral Scholars Program. Dr. Abram is a founding director of the Southern Regional Educational State Doctoral Scholars Program, where he brings more than 30 years of experience working on issues and policies and practice as it relates to higher education. Dr. Abram has developed one of the nation's best documented, nationally recognized, and successful programs for producing minority PhDs who seek faculty careers in academia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Dr. Mark Lee, who's an associate professor of biology and chair at Spelman College. In addition to serving as a full-time faculty member for 13 years, Dr. Lee is a co-principal investigator on NSF Foundation-funded projects to, one, infuse informatics into science curriculum at Spelman and make course-based undergraduate research experience a meaningful part of science education. On campus, he currently serves as a faculty advisor for conversion of science teaching spaces from traditional to more active and collaborative learning spaces. And on a personal note, Mark served a year of sabbatical at the graduate school at Michigan State University last year, and we miss you, Mark.
I appreciate that.
Lastly, as we have Katrina May, doctoral candidate at Georgia State University. Katrina is currently pursuing a PhD in mathematics and her doctoral certificate in women's studies at Georgia State University. Her dissertation will be focused on pedagogical practices in undergraduate mathematics classroom and inclusion strategies in higher education which promote recruitment and retention of unrepresented students in STEM. Her other research interests include combinatorics, thank you, LGBTQ plus inclusion in higher education, and intersectional feminist theory. Katrina, thank you for joining us. So to get us started this morning, what I'm going to ask the panelists to do is please introduce yourself, and as you do, can you each say a few words on your perspective relating to Julie's talk? And I know, Julie, you did an awesome job in your talk there, so there's certainly a lot of material for the panelists to work with. So Mark, how about if we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Rick, and thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. I was really encouraged by Julie's talk. I love the metaphor of the physics and this discussion, and it made me wonder if there was a certain observer effect. In other words, when an institution is called to the carpet on their lack of diversity, inclusion, and equity, then that leads to those optics and the representations, and that may be their focus is on representation rather than reform, and just wanted to know if that was something that you observed.
Would you like me to respond to that? Or should we wait
Sure,
to see?
go ahead.
Yeah, I think there definitely is. You know, academic CVs are basically a record of our achievements, our moments of pride, and I think that's representative of how deep shame goes as the alternative side of it. And in several of the departments that I studied that I had identified because they had become more equitable or diverse, it was the starting point of that story in a moment of shame where they realized something had to happen. And so the observer effect is not just a researcher coming in. I think it's the increasing recognition that within our fields, departments, universities, disciplines that are not managing these issues well are illegitimate to some degree, and that it's a function of being a legitimate organization that you have to be paying better attention and making concerted effort in this area.
Thank you.
Katrina?
So when I first heard the title for your talk, I was hoping you were going to talk about Barad's work because I really like it. But I think the thing that spoke to me the most is when you mentioned the two case studies, because for my master's degree, I was at an institution where they took the psychology department approach, and it was very much a bait and switch. So many of the graduate students who were from underrepresented groups who came there eventually ended up leaving as a result of the discrimination and prejudice that we faced. And then I'm now at an institution which is very much like the physics department, which focuses on interpersonal communication and making sure that we build a community. And it makes a very large difference in your experience as a graduate student. So I'm glad that you highlighted the differences there. And I had a question about, in your book, do you talk about ways that encourage the departments to ask graduate students about feedback, and how do you do concrete strategies that encourage more of the secondary thing that you talked about?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, that was one of the other patterns that I found across every single one of these spaces, is that the graduate students organized separately. However, the ones that had been able to sustain gains over time had a much more productive, constructive relationship with the faculty. The organization did, and support from the faculty in being able to be full participants in some department level processes like admissions and recruitment. Whereas others, it was really just understood to be about a small budget for cookies and a sort of pressure valve for the discussions that they wouldn't be willing to have with faculty in the room. So I think graduate students are really help pushing this within departments. At Stanford right now, there's actually a whole class that's being taught as a mini course for students to be able to come and learn how to organize for change within their PhD programs and departments. So I think students really are going to be at the forefront of this work for a long time.
Ainsley?
I too, like Mark, I love the quantum. Only in academics do you get to associate this issues of diversity and equity with quantum physics. I love that, and I love the juxtaposition of the two. You mentioned a couple things that I was very interested in, and you talked about change and small wins, and that was kind of the approach I took to this. It is complex, and we have complex systems, but the only way to attack this is just in small pieces and chunks. You know, it's about how do you eat an elephant, one small bite at a time. And that's the way I think that was been my approach in the design of my own program is, look, I can't change all of higher education, but I'm positioned to do something about small pieces of it, and over time, and I took a long view, over time, I think we can make larger changes if we make the right kind of changes along the way. And I like your idea is 30 years of this stuff, and there is no silver bullet. There is no one answer, and that's going to solve all our problems. It's a lot of systems, and I put down, you made a statement about spaces and systems, and that's what we need to focus on. And what I really like that idea of spaces and systems, because our organizations, our institutions are made up of lots of different systems all going on, different spaces. And our ability to impact and change some of those systems one at a time is really what I think will allow us to make changes long-term and significantly. So.
Okay, thank you for the opening remarks. The Planning Committee has developed a number of questions that we gave to the panelists to talk about, and so we're going to go through the panelists and propose these questions for them for comments, and then we'll take the questions from the audience. So to start with, this is for you, Julie. You talked about how institutional change can seem messy and that different people can view progress differently. Psychologically, the mess and the perceived lack of progress can be difficult for some individuals who are creating and attempting to sustain change. Do you have any suggestions as to how to overcome or get through those psychological difficulties?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is so fascinating is how you can have two people look at the same bar graph and read it totally differently. You can have one group pay attention, or one person pay attention to the upward slope, where the other person will pay attention to the y-axis as being very limited in what's changing over time. And I think that highlights the importance of having shared language and shared metrics. This is actually one of the components of a collective impact approach, is to be able to know what you have in common before you go into the space of the messiness. And then the other, which is also kind of about bridging, is about trust. And in the spaces that I've conducted research and in the own projects that I'm a part of in my own academic life, I see the power of trusting relationships as being an important foundation for being able to have the difficult conversations that come with messiness, and for being able to push through the psychologically difficult moments when a person with privilege needs to be checked for a perception that they hold or language that they use that's problematic. So I would say having some shared basis for action, and that would include both the language as well as the trust in the relationship, that we're all on each other's side, that we're in this together.
This next question's for Mark. Mark, you're an associate professor at Spelman College. Spelman has a top reputation in preparing African American women to go on to PhDs in STEM. From your perspective, are there lessons learned from how students are trained at Spelman that can be applied more generally to compel change towards generating more diverse STEM pipeline?
Yes, thank you. So a colleague of mine, a previous NSF rotator, Tasha Ennis, we are preparing a manuscript, and in that manuscript, we tried to unpack what were we doing to generate these numbers, these disparate numbers for the number of women who were getting STEM PhDs. So we looked at the research mentors who had directed their research projects as undergraduates, and what we found was that they weren't all African American females. So clearly at Spelman, African American females was our primary population, but somehow we were getting these outcomes from individuals who were from diverse backgrounds themselves. But in a broader sense, in diversity in that sense, it actually included white males and white females, Asian males and Asian females. So from that, we found out that what we had done was identified clear communication, aligned goals, supporting the students in achieving those goals, and tying those things to an institutional mission. So because Spelman already has a mission to educate African American women, for those of us who have also adopted that message, we already have infrastructure and systems in place at Spelman to support that. So it doesn't feel like we're trying to do it against the tide. We're doing it actually with institutional support. And it sounds general, but if you heard Julie's talk, these were the same kinds of themes that were there. I mean, once we realized that we're dealing with humans, not just diverse humans, but human needs are general. And if we find that human needs are being supported, humans have an opportunity to thrive. And that is true at Spelman, and I think it's true everywhere.
Thank you, Mark. This question is for Katrina. You're a doctoral candidate engaging in the CERTL program at Georgia State. Thank you, Katrina. You have a variety of research interests, including LGBTQ+, inclusion in higher education. When people talk about inclusive higher education, they are usually referring to inclusivity relating to gender identity and race ethnicity. But there are also important issues to be considered for the LGBTQ+ community. What are some of the unique change opportunities that you think we should be considering regarding inclusivity of the LGBTQ+ community?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'm a mathematician by trade, and in particular, I'm a combinatorialist, which means I've spent a lot of time in school learning how to count things. And when we're in combinatorics, we talk about the number of ways that we can put things into boxes. And then in my research as an intersectional feminist theory person, I learned a lot about how we should never put things into boxes. And so before I answer this question, I'd like to acknowledge that when we talk about the LGBTQ+ community, there are people in this community who are also people of color and are women and are people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And so it's important that we look at this as under an intersectional framework. And so we make sure that we are acknowledging that we just can't break these things up into separate entities. And then the second caveat I'd like to say is that as a multiracial lesbian woman who looks white, and also, as my family eloquently put it when I came out, doesn't look lesbian, my experience is very different than a black trans man. It's very different than a Latinx non-binary person. And so within the LGBTQ+ community, there's diversity within diversity within diversity. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all issue. So with those two caveats, I'll actually answer the question. So right now, I don't know how many people have been following, but the Supreme Court is mulling over a decision on whether or not LGBTQ plus people can be fired for being LGBTQ plus. And so one thing, when we're considering undergraduates as students and graduates as students, they're facing this idea that they might go through these 4 years or 6 years or 8 years of college only to get into a job where they can be fired for a part of their identity. And I think that acknowledging that in the classroom is important, because it's all well and good if I come in and say, here, calculate all these derivatives, when they're concerned whether everything that they're doing is just going to be for naught at the end. And so acknowledging that this group of students is facing issues with legally figuring out if their identity is worthwhile or not. So I think that's one thing that's unique to the LGBTQ plus community. One thing that we can do in higher ed that's very simple, that I think makes a very big difference, is asking our students what pronouns we should use when we talk to them. And so that seems like such a small thing, but you do two things when you do that. Number one, you signal to your students that you care about these issues. You might not understand them completely, and you don't have to, but you are telling them that you care about their gender identity, and you are going to make an effort to honor that. And two, you are signaling to other LGBTQ plus students in the room, even if they do identify with the typical pronouns you would use, that you are sensitive to these issues. And so that's like something small. Julie talked a lot about small wins. That's a small one. I'm sure a lot of us put like little first day, like get to know you things with our students, and that's a simple question that you can put on there that can make a big difference. The second thing that we can do is most, if not all, universities offer some sort of, at UGA we called it safe space training, LGBT safe space training, some sort of diversity training. And at UGA we got a little sticker that we could put on the door that was supposed to signify that your office is a safe space. And so going to those trainings is important, because then you can tell your students like you are safe space trained, and again, that signals to them that you know about these issues and you are somewhat sympathetic. And then secondly, continuing that work. So you can't just go to, we talked about one-off workshops, and those are great, but they don't really create persistent change. And I believe very firmly, I don't like the name safe space, because you can never create a safe space, you can only create a safer space. And so continuing the work on after you do those trainings is important too. So those are two like small things that I could think of.
Thank you very much. This question is for you, Ainsley. You have a unique perspective to share as the director of a regional educational board. Are there ways that you think institutions can best work together to promote change towards inclusive STEM higher education?
Yes, and let me give you all some perspectives. Mine is a very different kind of perspective. A little over 25 years ago, I had an idea, and I started an initiative to do something about faculty diversity on our college campuses. And I was very well positioned to do it from a regional perspective, and have since grown what is called the Doctoral Scholars Program into this 25-year initiative to diversify college faculty, right? And we have, again, it's about the small victories. And I can't change higher ed, I can't change graduate education, but I can impact the students who come into that arena. And that's what I set out to do. We put into operation a program that, first and foremost, you know, if I ask all of you what's the #1 problem for earning a PhD in the United States, the answer would be what? Money. There's somebody bright, graduate students. There we go, it's money. For anybody, I don't care who you are, it's money. But secondly, if you look at the research, and there have been a number of studies done that says very close to money for minority students is this whole sense of alienation and alienation within departments and isolation within departments. And we set out as a program to help address those issues, in particular, money, alienation, isolation, and all the other issues that present problems to students to earn a PhD. And I will say 25 years later, we have been, I think by any measure, very, very successful at doing that. But one of the things that has helped us do that, and you say, well, what do we do? It's partnerships. I have to partner with institutions. I think Bob has me on this panel because, hey, we're looking to partner. We're looking to partner with several of the things that Look, I look out in this room, I've looked around the audience. You know, one of the things ought to be obvious to the CERTL participants. There are not a whole lot of people of color in here, like it or not. It's about systems at our institutions, systems, those spaces that, for whatever reason, you know, we could have a whole meeting discussing those kinds of things, but it's the systems that, for whatever reason, I'm not bad-mouthing, I'm not making a judgment about it, but I'm saying the outcome is that students on your campuses don't engage. Students of color in particular on your campuses don't engage in the opportunities that your campuses present. CERTL's the right thing to do. It is helping prepare students to become effective faculty, inclusive faculty in their teaching techniques. That's what I want for the diverse faculty. I want them to have those skill sets, but they don't come to it easily because of the systems, the way the universities work. As a program, I'm looking for partners that can help me train these next generation faculty to access those things, to have those skills. I provide the space, and we do refer to it as safe space, for students to engage, where they feel like they've got the support, they do the things, that the information is being given to them in ways that they feel comfortable absorbing, taking forth, going forth, and doing good things. You know, I've been around long enough that the person Mark is working on that book on was one of my students. And you know, you've been around long enough where you see your folk go out and they're beginning to do the things, and I hope along the way we provide enough training and insights about the way the academy works, what needs to be done, that they start to make a difference. That was my long-term view of making a difference. If I can train these students in what they need to know, do, to make a change, they will be the change agents. They will start to write the book. They will have those administrative positions. They will be, at some point in the future, in positions of power to make decisions within their department, within the university. Just tell you a quick story. I was in the airport, seated next to a gentleman last week. I was going to Baton Rouge. He was headed to Baton Rouge, and we just started up a conversation and came to learn he was a professor at Purdue. And he was talking about, you know, he was in agriculture. Now, this is an African-American male PhD at Purdue in agriculture. And we're talking, and he says, you know, and he asked me, well, what do you do? And I was describing, he goes, you know, back when I was in school, there was this program I went to, and this meeting where all these minority people, he says it was just so empowering, powerful. And I looked at him and said, well, you know, I'm the guy who started that meeting and who runs that meeting. And he goes, I knew you from somewhere. My point in telling you that story is, you know, you have impact on people. And one of the things we do, and I'm sorry I'm being a little long-winded, but one of the things I did do with this program is, and I know I'm different than everybody, I'll say it this way, I know I'm different than everybody in here, is that I get to have every year in actually less than 2 weeks, meet with the largest group of minority PhDs in the country. I have 1,000 underrepresented minority students will meet in Atlanta in 2 weeks to talk about all the things we're talking about here and more. 1,000. Think of what the power, the visual cues that when you put 1,000 minority PhD students from all over the country, 60% of them in STEM, in the same room. And think of the synergies that come out of that. Think of the opportunities that come out of that. This is what we do as a program, and this is the kind of change we're trying to make, just one student at a time. That's the way we're approaching this, one student at a time. Because if we don't have them there, frankly, I don't see much hope for change if we don't have them there.
Thank you very much, Ainsley. Well, we're going to open the panel up for questions now. We have a couple mics that'll sprint across the auditorium to get those questions. And either direct your question to all the panelists, or if you'd like to direct the question to a specific panelist, that's fine as well.
in terms of the discussion for gender, the need to and I don't want to, I'm not a category person either, but in terms of understanding the intersectionality between ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, the need to separate biological sex and gender to kind of help roll out the idea of approaching transgender issues or gender non-conforming students. I know it's not good to put them in boxes, but you don't know what they're going through if you don't know who they are, whether, what they're dealing with on campus. It's something I keep seeing not only in educational research, but even at the basic science research, looking at health disparities.
Yeah, so transgender issues are something that are hard to talk about because it's something that a lot of us don't really fully understand. And there are a lot of unique issues that transgender students face. And one that I've been thinking about a lot lately is some of my fellow graduate students are transgender, and we are allowed to give preferred names to our universities. But in the actual, it's called different things, but in the actual Blackboard system, the name that's listed is often their dead name. And when we, as graduate students, teach courses, that is the name that our students see. So on the one hand, our students, we're automatically, if a transgender person is automatically outed to their students, they have to worry about discrimination on both ends from their students and from their professors. They're often worried about issues with paying for transitional surgeries. They are worried about issues, mental health issues that often crop up with being transgender. They're often isolated from their families. And so there are all of these issues that crop up, especially for transgender students. And when you are a graduate student, it does seem to come at you from all angles. On the other side of the coin with lesbian, gay, pansexual, non-conforming people, we're also confronted with the issue of, should I come out to my classroom? And what does that look like? And how do I do that authentically? And what are the repercussions of that? And so I think that you're right in saying that these are a widespread array of issues that the LGBTQ community faces. And when you are a graduate student, and that's the perspective I'm most familiar with, it is coming at you from all different angles. And so I think that acknowledging that in our programs of doing everything that we can to make sure that our students know that they're welcome here. So I organized a safe space training at UGA, and not a single professor came to it. And so that says something to the LGBT students in the room. It says that we don't care enough to come to a 3-hour training. And so how can we then come out to our advisors, or if we are forced to stay in the closet with our advisors, what does that mean for our mental health? So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So with regards to your positive feedback loop of like fewer minority faculty, basically this kind of cycle, have you either witnessed or talked to folks who have found a possible solution for diversity fatigue? It's the idea that folks from underrepresented groups are overrepresented in committees and research committees, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a major challenge. So the one that I had up there was really more of a negative loop, I think, but I can also in that speak to the loop that comes with what I would call like a virtuous cycle of learning your way into this. It does require effort, and probably the most important thing that I saw is that in the spaces where they were able to stick with it long enough that they could move into a second cycle of effort, it was because it wasn't just one person who was trying to drive it on behalf of the entire department, or there was one person who was overtasked and kind of constantly up against the resistance of their senior colleagues, but rather it was that it was much more of a collective responsibility. And the chemistry department case that I conducted was one where really they learned their way into how to bring about change by getting as many of the senior faculty engaged in it and not just the junior faculty. And I think that also then gave the junior faculty in the second round of efforts that they put forth confidence that they could do so with a more open voice than they might have in departments where usually it's left to junior folks. But that's all speaking without the layer of race involved. And I think the demands of student advising and the demands of the politics within departments really do present a unique burden. And one of the sets of findings from my work was from speaking specifically with all the students of color across all of these departments. And we found that they experienced their department's diversity work, as important as it was and as happy they were to be part of it, as a real emotional burden. And so we used the literature on emotional labor to describe the sort of simultaneous benefits and burdens that come with this. So I do think that faculty, insofar as they're involving graduate students, should do so, but also be aware that students of color are there to get their degrees, and they want to contribute to positive change. But if white students aren't being expected to similarly contribute, then you're placing an added burden and barrier toward the PhD on the students whom you say you're trying to promote opportunities for.
There's a question. Yeah, go ahead, Kitch.
Before that question, can I provide a brief comment in response to
go for
Julie's
it, Mark.
statement? So one of the other things that our manuscript is trying to highlight is that we cannot wait until the professoriate looks like the populace. In other words, the change has to happen now with the individuals who have already attained that rank and position. And so the burden is upon all of us who are already at that position, even if we are not part of a so-called diverse population.
Right.
So back to that point, if we have to wait until the individuals look like that, it's never going to happen, because the systems won't change unless those who are part of the system are part of that change. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
My name is Star from Penn State, and my question speaks to Dr. Julie's point, if you speak to it, then the rest of the panel, if you would have some comments on your work at the University of Michigan. And it seemed that there was some discussion around what I would think to be the theory of other mothering. Those African American women and possibly men are basically translating Black culture to white faculty, but that's an additional unpaid burden, and no one translates white, so then why should Black people have to go through that extra work that's often unacknowledged and unpaid? It becomes it's just too much. It's just too much.
It's fact, absolute fact, yes. No, and I think in the paper we talk about, it's a labor justice issue. It is an actual issue of labor justice because of the time and emotional energy that goes into that. And there were 2 administrative staff members, both people of color, and the department would not have had the success as it was recognized for had it not been for their efforts.
But they don't get credited for that in that kind of work, and that's really unfortunate when that happens.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
other people off the hook that they don't have to talk to their students. Let's ask this lady, and she'll tell us, no, you do the work of what you need to be doing.
So in this particular case, I have no doubt that that's the case writ large. In this particular space, over the year that I was there was, because of the resistance that you're talking about, there was a push that the white folks in the department, specifically the senior faculty, began to recognize that we need to go off and engage in some of the campus resources that are available for learning in this, apart from the people within our department. We cannot be leaning on people within our department, specifically people of color who have administrative staff roles where they're not being compensated for this. So it is, you're absolutely right. And I think being on campuses where there are such resources available is an asset that they had at Michigan that I don't think all campuses have.
I had a comment on that, if I may.
Go.
So as a graduate student, I also found that I was doing a lot of this work of getting my department to care about diversity, and it was taking time away from other duties. And so I asked my graduate coordinator and some people who were coordinators of grants at my institution if, as part of my stipend, I could receive like 3 hours a week or 4 hours a week of, instead of doing study hall or teaching a course, I could dedicate that to working on diversity initiatives for the department. And they were very receptive to that. Of course, it has to go through like 20 committees. But I left the university before they could do that, but I think they are implementing that this year, and so that is a potential way that you could offset that. So yes, you are doing extra work for the department, but we're gonna compensate you for it. And so that took the burden off whoever is doing it this year, because now they have 4 hours that they're not teaching that they can dedicate to this while getting paid.
Star, may I also comment on that? And one of the things programmatically, we're trying to make sure for these future faculty as they're coming into the academy, we make a concerted effort to make sure they understand exactly that burden. I mean, you can understand it intellectually, but when you take that job and those pressures are being put upon you to perform, to serve students, we try to make sure our students are aware of that when they go into the academy, those jobs, that they understand that if they're in a tenure track position, that tenure clock has started, the 3-year review is going to come up. You got to make sure that they really understand that. We make a lot of effort to have them really understand what is at stake here if they don't get it, as in don't get tenure, if they don't do well in the pre-tenure review. We're trying to make sure, I was saying this to somebody the other day, that to know how to win at the game of academe, if you will, to become a tenured professor and go all the things, all the accolades that go with that, you have to understand the rules of the game, because it's hard to win a game if you don't know what the rules are. And we make a lot of effort to be sure these students understand the rules of the game. And we're talking about very bright people that if they understand the rules of the game, the vast majority of them will win at it.
I can barely hear your
Speak
question.
up,
Can you eat the mic, please?
Better.
As a graduate student, sometimes I feel like a lot of other grad students that usually when you try and make change or learn more about education or inclusivity, it's seen as a distraction from your research, and that's usually one of the basic excuses against grad students trying to make these changes. And I guess, as you say, playing the game. I feel like sometimes there's an even higher pressure to do well in your research, because then it's, oh, you're not doing well in your research because you're focusing on these other things. So is our PhD programs in a way kind of rigged against these people who would be making this change? And is there a way to, I guess, open up people's minds as to what PhDs can be used for after you graduate?
So to answer that question, yes, they're rigged. Just in case you were wondering about that, they are rigged against you. I'll take a stab at trying to just say, listen, for all of you graduate students in the room, I mean, you've got to navigate the professors, some who will be with you, and some are going to be against you. And your task is navigating that. I don't think there is an answer to that. But the difficulty, and you try to find colleagues, hopefully in your department or even outside of your department, who can help you navigate that. There are other students who do them both. I counsel students all the time who've got that advocacy bug, but I'm always bringing them back. It's like, don't forget why you are there and what your goal is, because it is not a level playing field. Graduate students in here know that, right? It is not a level playing field. The faculty hold all the cards. They determine whether you get out. And I try to remind my students of that all the time, and how you navigate it, and to navigate it carefully. But it can be done. Students do it all the time, but I just always remind them. Now, you can do a whole lot more work when you have those 3 letters after your name, PhD, than you can if you don't have that. And so just don't lose sight of that. And you can advocate more when you have PhD after your name. But you got to get there first. And navigating is not easy sometimes when you want to advocate. I have had lots of students who've done things, but I just tell them, it's time for you to let go and let those students who are coming in as new grad students to take over and run with it, because your time is up and you need to be getting out here and going to do the other things that you're on a path to do. And it's just trying to bring them, try to keep this in perspective for students, because it's difficult sometimes, but it can be done.
And what you also see in the personage of Katrina is someone who advocated for their own needs. So much of the work that we want to do seems like additional work, but we have to put in place our systems that allow it to be part of the work.
Yes.
So in you heard her PhD program description, it's not something else she's doing, it's part of what she's doing. And then she advocated even further to have it be included as part of her graduate training. And so if individuals have that audacity, great. If they don't, we need to help them build it and encourage it. And then we also need to do it exactly what Ansley says, remind them of the first job, which is to complete the training and then get in the position of power so you can make a change.
We have one more question down in front, I think, and then we'll.
But I want to thank Katrina so much for bringing up what you did, because it is such a struggle, and I've been waiting to hear this conversation of just recognizing the fact that it is a challenge to come out and decide whether you come out to your faculty members or your students. And so I really just wanted to thank you for that. And so just very quickly. So thank you so much.